Denny, thank you very much, and thank all of you for being here, and thank my colleagues on the House side for sponsoring this legislation. And I would say to them also, thanks for their help back in the 80s. This was a long slog. It didn't happen overnight. It took many years, a lot of meetings. Many of you were involved in it. But we finally got it done, as Steny said, on July the 26th of 1990. And today we celebrate the 17th anniversary of it. Steve Bartlett, who is here with us today, was a member of the House at that time, truly instrumental in making sure that we had the votes and could get everybody together on this issue. I had a phone call this morning from Bob Dole, who is here in spirit, but he's working on this Veterans Commission, as you maybe know, and he couldn't be here, but he wanted to be clear that he supports the legislation, and he'll do everything he can to help us get it through as soon as possible. And as Steny said, as Congressman Hoyer said, Senator Specter is my chief co-sponsor. He's also in Philadelphia with the President this morning, so he couldn't be here, but wanted you to know that he'll do everything he can to help on the Senate side. Again, from the very beginning, when we started this process back in the early 80s, we all agreed at that time that this should never be a partisan issue. The Americans with Disabilities Act should never in any way have any kind of partisan tinge, and it never did. People in the President Bush's administration, President Bush was very supportive of it, and Boyd and Gray, and so many people in that administration, Dick Thornburg, Sam Skinner, and others at that time that helped get it through, and both Republicans and Democrats on the Senate and House side at that time. That's, again, how we're going to be doing this bill. This should never in any way lean itself one way or the other towards any kind of partisan influence. There is nothing more bipartisan, or I should say nonpartisan, than making sure that every individual with a disability has access to every part of the American dream.
Yeah.
I just want to recognize a couple of other people here. Again, I want to thank Yoshiko Dart for not only being here, but for all of her years of working in the vineyards on behalf of all people with disabilities, and of course to pay homage to Justin, who was very instrumental in getting the initial bill passed. I also want to recognize Bobby Silverstein, who is here. Bobby, who, wherever he is, back here, who, again, I always say a lot of times, you know, Jim, we get the applause and stuff, but it's guys like that that do the work. And it was Bobby who just did so much of the work. And,
Particularly in the Senate.
I won't repeat what he just said. Hey, I was in the House. I know how that operates over there, too, okay? And also Andy Imperato, who has done such a great job as head of the Americans Association of People with Disabilities. And last, I didn't see him here, but I know he's also here with us in spirit. He was also instrumental in the House side in getting the ADA passed, and has been working with all of us, I know, on the phone and in person, to pull this together, and that's Tony Coelho. Tony's just been great in helping us get this forward. So, as the chief sponsor of the ADA in the Senate, I take pride in the progress that we've made since 1990. But again, as Congressman Hoyer said, we have a problem. In recent years, the courts have ignored Congress's clear intent as to who should be protected under the ADA. The courts have narrowed the definition of who qualifies as an individual with a disability. As a consequence, many Americans that we intended to be protected under the ADA, including people with epilepsy and diabetes, cancer, are not protected anymore. You know, when you look back through the legislative history, Congress intended the protections of the ADA to apply to all persons without regard to mitigating circumstances or medication or using any kind of an assistive device. Let me just read the language that was in the report. When we filed the report with the ADA in 1990, quote, whether a person has a disability should be assessed without regard to the availability of mitigating measures, such as reasonable accommodations or auxiliary aids. For example, I go on, a person who is hard of hearing is substantially limited in the major life activity of hearing, even though the loss may be corrected through the use of a hearing aid. Likewise, persons with impairments such as epilepsy or diabetes which substantially limit a major life activity are covered under the definition of disability even if the effects of the impairment are controlled by medication, end quote. That was in our report language. I can remember sitting in the Supreme Court with Bob Dole one time when the Supreme Court came down with one of their bad decisions on this, and one of the justices said that there wasn't sufficient evidence. And we walked out, and I remember Senator Dole said to the press assembled, evidence? We had 300 and some cases. How many does the Supreme Court need? They need 400? 385? 425? We thought we had more than enough evidence of what we were trying to do. But nonetheless, the Supreme Court ignored congressional intent, and what they've done is they've created kind of a supreme absurdity. People with serious health conditions like epilepsy or diabetes who are fortunate to have treatments who make them more capable and independent and more able to work may find that they're no longer covered by the ADA. Now, if those individuals are no longer covered under the ADA, then their request for a reasonable accommodation at work can be denied or they can be fired. On the other hand, if they stop taking their medication, they'll be considered a person with a disability, but they'll be unable to do their job. What a supreme absurdity. It's wrong. It flies in the face of clear, unambiguous congressional intent. When we passed the law, there was common agreement on both sides of the aisle, both chambers, and with the White House, that the law was designed to protect any individual who is treated less favorably because of a current, past, or perceived disability. So again, this cries out for a modest, reasonable legislative fix. That's exactly what Congressman Hoyer and Congressman Sensenbrenner are taking the lead on the House side, and Senator Specter and I are doing in the Senate side today by introducing the ADA Restoration Act of 2007. I'm constrained to say one other thing here, and that is, keep in mind the Supreme Court in no way challenged the constitutionality of the ADA. It simply misconstrued congressional intent. So the bill we're introducing today amends the definition of disability so that the people who we originally intended to be protected from discrimination are covered under the ADA. So again, 17 years ago, we passed it with overwhelming bipartisan, bicameral support and the support of the White House. Likewise, today we're building a strong bicameral, bipartisan majority to support this ADA restoration. And again, it's going to take time. I understand it's going to go to 4 committees in the House. I don't know how many will have to do it in the Senate. But again, it'll take some time. But look what we did together, all of us in the 1980s, by persevering and never giving up. We're going to need your same perseverance now. Let's make sure that we have our hearings, get it through the committees. And again, we may not be able to get it passed this fall with the schedule and everything, but let's make next year the year that we pass the restoration to the ADA. Thank you.